the Restoring Our City podcast, where we have candid conversations on today's topics to help connect our community. And it is cold outside. It is really cold outside in sweltering Texas. But I know it's frigid out there in Chicago. I am with the one and only Jeswin Thomas. You took the dog for a walk, and how are you feeling? Are you frostbitten yet?
No, not yet. But I was telling Joby this before. I never thought I'd be the person that bought a dog shoes. But last Christmas, we figured out if the dog steps in salt and then steps in snow, he starts limping because just like salt melts ice, it starts burning his paws. So my dog has shoes now. I don't know how I feel
Yes,
about this, but at
this
least
is
it's for a
not a
practical
fashion.
reason.
So it's not a fashion statement, right? But
Not yet.
you have bought your dog shoes. And I think that's just a great sign of the times that we are in, right? It is winter time. It is the holidays. We are excited. I think this is a great time of year. If you haven't listened to some of our episodes, our prior episode before we started talking about Thanksgiving, Jeswin, claimed his stake in the ground that Thanksgiving is the goat of all holidays. But
Hmm.
I mean, when we think about the reason for the season, Jeswin, it is someone's birthday coming up. It is Jesus's birthday, which was news to my kids who are very young and they forget everything from last year. And I told my daughter, I was like, do you know why Christmas is Christmas? Because she saw Santa Claus at the library and she was so stoked. And I was like, but you know whose birthday it is, right? It's Jesus's birthday. And you should have seen the look on her face. She was like, what? Are you kidding me? It's Jesus's birthday? Why am I getting gifts? And that's exactly what I want to explore. Why am I buying someone else gifts? But you know what? I think it's a great time of year. I love the festivity. I love just the giving, the generosity, but also all the traditions that happen around this time of year. It's so much fun. But as Indian Christians growing up, Christmas traditions weren't always there. We didn't celebrate all of them.
Hmm.
I think it's kind of evolved in my family. I don't know about yours, but Jeswin, like there's a stark difference between some of the Christian traditions that we do as Indians versus what we do as American grown people, right? In the Western
Yeah.
culture. So who does it better? Who does Christmas traditions better, the East or the West? And I
Hmm.
think we should play a little East versus West game about Christmas traditions because the East versus West All-Star game stinks. They don't do it right. So they don't do it right at all. So I think we probably need to do a better activity and rank who does it better in some of these areas of Christmas. So I think we got to start off with probably our favorite tradition when it comes to food.
Mm.
Christian traditions for food in India. You've got some pretty, great hits here. You got palapam and stew, biryani, beef or chicken curry versus the West. You've got eggnog, you've got roast dinners, you got cookies and gingerbread houses. Who takes the cake here, East or West?
Dude,
Justin, what do you
this is
think?
gonna be tough for me because on at least like the meal side, nothing beats palapum and chicken stew. All right, that's number one, the goat for sure. The hard part for me is Indians also like fruitcakes around this time of year, and no one likes fruitcakes. What the heck is it? What is the fruit inside of it? It's this colorful gelatin that's been hardened. This is like fake fruit. So I'd definitely take the American version of the cookies, but palabum stew can't be beat. But that fruitcake, dude. What do you do with fruitcake? Do you like it at all?
Honestly, I think it's just for decor because, like, there's no decorations in most Indian households that I know. And I hope that's wrong. Like, we've got our Christmas tree up, but growing up, we didn't have all that stuff. So, like, the only colorful thing that remotely resembled the tree, is the fruitcake that nobody
Hmm.
touched. I have yet to see anyone eat an actual piece of fruitcake. I've always seen it completely intact, no bites out of it, no slices, nothing. It's almost like somebody delivers it and no one touches it. So
Dude, if
you're
you've had a good fruitcake and you completely disagree with this take, please send us one because I would love to try whatever the heck you're eating. Maybe I've just been buying the wrong thing and my parents have just been getting the wrong brand for years, but I'm down to try something new, maybe.
I think that's a great idea to go into the new year. Food reviews. Send us your dish and we will eat them. Live review on the air, record it, and send it to the masses. Who knows? Maybe you could start a restaurant and change our minds. So it sounds like the East is taking this, right? With Palapa McCurry. Can't beat it. Can't beat it. How about church services? I know traditions are a little bit different in the East versus West when you talk about like midnight mass. I know in South Asia and in Eastern culture, those midnight masses that are really great. But then you also get the candlelight services in the West, right? Which I think is really cool too. Christmas Eve services and the candlelight. What do you think takes the cake there? What's a better tradition?
Church at night. Church at midnight for sure has to take the cake. Once or twice a year, we need to go to church at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. just to be there into the next day. So whether it's Christmas, whether it's a watch night service, we need a couple of those on the calendar, right? Like genuinely miss them because I haven't been to one in years. Yeah, the fire is cool if you're a pyromaniac, which I think you are, Joby, but I think the midnight mass for sure should be the winner here.
No, I agree. And I was just thinking, like, when I'm 8 years old and I'm complaining about being at watch night service at 10 o'clock at night, now we're like, man, I miss those days, right? Like, I really wish I can go to church at midnight. But there's truth to that. I like that. I like the midnight mass. I like the change in ambiance, especially for the holidays. You definitely need that. So we're going east on this regard. But we got to talk about the decor, though. I think, I mean, it's a little overdone. I know growing up at church, I don't know if you remember this. There was a house in our neighborhood of our church growing up for every holiday. That house went all out. And like as we left our church, we would drive past this house and it was just
Mm,
like you could not see the grass. You could not see the lawn because there was just unlimited decor.
so true.
Yeah, but like when you talk about South Asian decor, I know there are some traditions in India. Obviously, there's no evergreen trees, but you got the banana trees, the mango trees that are lit up, versus you got the evergreen trees with the fake snow, like I have in my living room right now. The lights, the stockings. Who takes the cake on decor?
Yeah, sadly, I'm gonna have to give it to the West for sure. The
Sadly.
evergreen, yeah, everything else. I say sadly because there was not an evergreen tree in Bethlehem. All right, so if we're going for accuracy, the East has to take it. If we're going just for general nostalgia, we'll give it to the West, and I'm
There you
siding
go.
with the West on this.
There you go. I mean, there is something nice and refreshing about the evergreen trees and the wreath and all that fun stuff. But then the ultimate showdown has got to be Santa Claus in the West, and you got Father Christmas in the East. And I know we've had some experiences with Father Christmas or somebody who was in the scary mask of Father Christmas in India. I know they're technically like the same person or representative of the same person, but who takes the cake here? Who would you rather be locked in a room with at night?
A Father Christmas, hands down. I don't know if I'd be wanting to be locked in a room with them at night, but Father Christmas is the most hype figure that I could think of. Normal average size human being that goes all out on Christmas. That's the only one that could actually fit down a chimney, first off.
That's true.
Second off, have you seen Father Christmas dance? Like, oh my gosh. There's one distinct memory I think Joby and I have talked about on a previous episode where we went to a mission trip in Delhi and we grew up in a church that was very, against many traditions. So I never thought I would ever see our pastor next to Father Christmas. But my gosh, when I saw him preaching to a crowd of kids while Father Christmas pops up on stage and starts throwing candy into the crowd and the chaos ensuing in this meeting while I'm on the sideline with Joby just sipping some chai, I am like, that memory is such a core formational, just etched into my memory thing
Yeah.
that like I will never forget that moment.
Dude, that was the best chai I think I've ever had in my life. It was just
Mhm.
something about being in Delhi where it was freezing cold in December and then just seeing kids get pelted with candy from Father Christmas. Great, great memories. But you know what? I think all of this to say, I know we're having a little bit of fun about Christmas traditions. I think it's important to talk about the tension that sometimes arises. And I think you kind of alluded to it. Some of us probably grew up in churches where we didn't lean into these traditions. And so I think it begs the question that I think we want to unpack a little bit on this episode. Does it matter whether we practice Christmas traditions? So, do traditions really matter? And I think we need to unpack that. And maybe the captain obvious answer is, yeah, of course they matter. They're really important. But I think we need to like unpack this a little bit because there are groups of people, maybe even denominations that look at certain traditions of like, hey, this is way too ritualistic. We don't have to do this. We got to look at the heart behind everything versus, hey, there are some, important, influential moments of the calendar that we should recognize and reflect on. But Jessica, what do you take? Like, what's your take on this? Like, when you think about traditions and the significance of them?
Mhm. Yeah, I'll at least maybe speak from our experiences growing up. Growing up, Joby and I went to a Pentecostal denomination that was very against traditions, or at least didn't emphasize it. I don't know if we were against it or didn't emphasize it. And it was
Yeah.
always framed as they don't mean anything. They're just empty rituals that people do repetitively, and there really is nothing behind it. And so that was really the framing of what we thought about when we thought about, sacraments, traditions, annual church calendar type things. And so growing up, that's exactly what I believed, right? Like, yeah, we don't need to do any of these things because there's really nothing behind it. And the people that practiced it essentially, didn't know what they were doing in some senses. And I think it was maybe coming from a place where a lot of our parents came from, these traditional environments where, they would see people that were generationally Christian just doing this ritualistic thing, but not really living a transformed life. And so they just associated traditions and repetitive actions as something that was almost empty in a sense, and that's what they preached to us. So that's at least the background that I remember growing up
Yeah.
with, and I don't know if that was. I mean, I'm sure that was the same for you, but I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, it's a good way to frame it because I think people could just hear the word traditions and interpret that in a lot of different ways, whether it comes to certain sacraments that you might do on a Sunday versus certain holidays or even seasons of the calendar that you might, reflect on, right? And I think a really good example is Advent, right? Especially the season that we're in. Even just the word Advent, like trying to understand it or even just have that as a moment in time as a church body to reflect on and understand the meaning of Jesus' coming and arrival to earth. But like growing up, not on the radar at all. It's not on the radar at all. And then like when I go to a different church, a bigger multicultural church, still in the same denomination, mind you, it's really interesting the significance and the importance of that season, and even just like lighting the Advent, you know, candles and all those kind of things. Where I probably didn't grow up doing some of these things, whereas it might have been looked at as, hey, why are you doing this thing that probably has no meaning, right? I think it's some of those things that you missed out on growing up, and it's almost portrayed as it's not really significant or important. And I think that's what we want to reflect on. Are these traditions really important for us and do they actually matter? And if so, like why? Like what's the significance and how does it influence me? And I think that's where we want to unpack it because I think there's a couple schools of thoughts, right? There's people who think that these traditions are very empty and ritualistic. Do you see any merit in that argument at all? Like, do some of our old pastors and church members and maybe denominations have a point there?
Yeah, 100%. I remember this distinctly. I remember I had a coworker that was agnostic, right? Not a practicing Christian, definitely didn't exactly knew if he believed in God or not, but he grew up in a very traditional church. And so whenever it was Lent, the dude gave up meat, just eating meat, and he would only, essentially be a pescatarian on Fridays as well. And I'm like, dude, you don't go to church and you don't really believe in Jesus, what is even the point of observing Lent? And it was just one of those things where it's like, hey, this is what I did growing up every single year. So I've just decided to do it. And I'm like, well, why though? Right? Like, what is the point? What is the heart behind it? And so I've seen it literally with my own eyes, right? I don't know if you had a similar story of someone in your life, but 100% that is absolutely a thing.
That's crazy. It's like it almost seems like there's a empty meaning behind it, but like I could see, old uppachins and ummachies looking at that and be like, see, this is the reason why you don't do something without the heart behind it. And I think there's a very valid point behind that. I'm just thinking about all the traditions that we used to do growing up. Like I know with Christmas too, we would, do traditions of like trying to get gifts for each other, do Secret Santa, all these kind of things. And it wasn't really tied to church disciplines or anything like that. But I don't know, it's just one of those things where, like, it was just a fun thing to do collectively as a group, and maybe that's why people lean onto these traditions. It's not because of a religious reason or significance that it's gonna influence my life, it's like the nostalgia of it, right? Like, I wanna do this because I grew up doing this as a kid, and that's why it kinda makes me go back to that moment in time and be reflective, right?
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's where, again, like some of the preaching that we heard growing up, especially when the tradition is tied to something that ought to be spiritual, there's some validity to some of the things that they have concerns about in seeing how it may or may not have been practiced with the people around them. But that's for sure, I don't want to invalidate that angle. But I don't know
Yeah.
if that's a totality of just how we ought to view traditions being practiced.
Yeah, and I think that's why we wanna look at the Bible. Like, what does the Bible say? What does scripture actually tell us about holidays and even special observances? Jesus even moving past Christmas, right? Like, obviously, Santa Claus is not in the Bible. Newsflash to everybody out there if you're not a
What?
Christian. Like, what? Oh my god, mind blown, right? Like, you think about this, but there are some, traditions and special days on the calendar that really are instituted in scripture to help us reflect and remember really critical moments, right?
Mhm.
Couple verses and I think passages that you could probably read if you're listening to this, go home and read and dissect this a little bit more. But I think there's a really great text in Exodus chapter 12, verse 14 says, "This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast." You think about that command from God during the moment of the Exodus and that event that God is talking about a feast that you would keep not just for those people to reflect on at that moment, but through generations. It's almost like signifying that this is a statute forever. He is totally saying that and keeping it as a feast. Like there's a special moment along with an activity that you do for this day to be reflective. Like when you
Yeah.
see that, like how do you view how God views traditions and how does this speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, for the camp that says traditions are not important, I mean, I would almost challenge them with this text and many other texts that we see in the Old Testament where God institutes something. And what's interesting is sometimes we have this idea that, hey, yes, there's a lot of things that happen in the Old Testament, and they're pointing forward toward Jesus, and that's
Yeah,
correct, right? I think Passover points forward toward Jesus, other feasts that we see in the Bible, other traditions that God instituted, pointing toward a deeper meaning. But at the same time, when we look at this verse in Exodus, it's interesting that it says this is going to be a statute forever, right? Keep it as a feast. It doesn't say just keep it until this certain point in time, but keep it forever. Even when Jesus was here, he doesn't say, hey, I'm the substance of the shadow. Now let's throw the shadow away. It's
right.
almost like, no, and there's now almost like you have a clearer lens to what it meant. So it's almost like you could celebrate it even more. And not just this passage, some of the other ones that come to mind, this is one where God institutes something and says, hey, you guys remember it and keep it forever. But how many times do we see that in the story of Israel, where a major event happened, maybe a battle, maybe a crossing of the Jordan River, where they would come and they would set up a memorial and say, "This thing, this symbol, this thing that we're setting up today, this is going to be a reminder for us that we can go back and reflect and say, look at what God did here." You think about Joseph, right? When Joseph was at Bethel, when he sees the dream of the ladder going up and down before he's about to meet Esau, he takes, I believe, a stone, right? And doesn't he set up
Jacob,
something there?
yeah.
So this is going to be a remembrance for me to remember that what God did here. And so, whether it's God instituting it or people instituting it, you see this throughout scripture as a pattern. So how could we say that it's not important? I don't know if you have a reflection or a counter thought to that.
No, you're totally right on Jacob in the ladder, right? Like, I don't want the YouTubers
Yes.
to come in the
Yes.
comments for you as they've done
Thank you.
before. Check out the clips. But yes, absolutely, totally understand that. I think there is a significance about remembering and reflection because we often forget. And I think the folks that are in the camp that say, hey, traditions don't matter, we need to do everything from the purity of our heart. I totally see that. But at the same time, we're almost invalidating like our human limitations, right? We are limited as human beings. We are totally going to forget all of his benefits. Like when we think about like Psalm 103, like forget not all of his benefits. You know why? Because you do. You often do. And I think we need to have these holidays and traditions that focus and center our heart. And yes, they can be empty if we do them just to do them without the actual intent and reflection on what they're meant for, right? Like if we think about these traditions and say, all right, yeah, we got to do them, but we got to do them right because I think they are very significant. How can that actually impact us as Christians? Like if you do these traditions, like take Lent or Advent and some of these seasons, right? These reflection points. How can these traditions and participating them in a healthy way actually help us outside of just, hey, let's celebrate and get some gifts? Like, what's
Yeah.
your take on that?
No, there's so many things that I could think of, right? And whether it's like you said, you take special time to remember, it forms something within your heart. But even I would almost counter that. Let's just say you're not doing it with the correct heart, or you're doing it out of ignorance. Let's just take it that
Mhm.
way. I mean, I loved how you kind of started this off, Joby, where you have your daughter and she realizes like, oh my gosh, like we celebrate Christmas because it was the birth of Jesus. This is Jesus' birthday. She doesn't understand the gravity of what that means. But as she grows up and she celebrates this time of year again and again and again and again, not fully understanding or developing that meaning, one day, right? Like, God willing, and it's all of our prayers that she comes to know the Lord as her personal savior. One day, when that realization hits and the gravity of what she has been doing her entire life hits, this season that she's been celebrating maybe with a different heart, but finally when her eyes are open and she celebrates it the next time as if it's the first time she's doing it properly, I guarantee you that is such a formative moment that almost hits where everything she has done and maybe she is ingrained without realizing it finally becomes alive, right? And in some senses it's the head knowledge that drops to the heart that makes everything alive. So I would almost counter that and say, hey, we can do this with the right heart, and you might even do this with the wrong heart traditionally, but one day when God does create a new heart in you, it almost makes everything you've been doing ritualistically come alive in a new way that you've never realized before.
Wow. That's really great. That's a great point. My daughter's 3, by the way, so, like, for anybody who's like, "Oh, who's this heathen daughter that is not listening and believing in Christmas?" She's 3. This is going to be her 3rd Christmas. So I don't blame her for not listening. But I think this is such a great point. Like, even man, like, the traditions that you've done, like, we put a star. I have my kids put a star on the top of the Christmas tree, and it was just one of those things, very first time. My son is 6 now, and we put the star on the tree. Like, what does that mean? And I was, like, trying to explain, like, it's not just, like, the decor on the tree, but, like, pointing to the star and, like, the story of how Jesus was born and people looking at the star for guidance and to where Jesus is. It's, like, conceptually, that's a very difficult concept to understand now, but, like, you are right, Jess, when it's, like, the formulation of the memories and the repetitiveness of those traditions are starting to plant seeds. And I think about, I know we were talking about this before, maybe offline, but like the things that you used to do at church, like growing up, like I think about memory verses and just that might be a tradition in some churches, right? Like you have all the little kids learn a memory verse. Like, are they going to be scholars, biblical scholars, because they learned a memory verse on Sunday? Probably not. But like the repetitiveness of that act is planting seeds that can like make you realize the depth and the gravity of the lesson later down, like when God chooses to unlock it in our hearts, right? I think that's such a great lesson. And
Yeah,
so
and
maybe there is like emptiness in the traditions that actually are fruitful later on.
yeah, and you even think about verses like teach a child a way that it should go, and when they are old, they won't depart from it. And really, if you kind of read through commentaries and even hear like a Jewish take on it, the translation ought to be teach a child a way they should go, and when they are old, it will not depart from them. So even if they may forget their roots because of the way that you've trained them, even through these rituals, even through their traditions, they have an anchor to remember back on and say like, "Oh yeah, this is something we did all the time growing up. Yeah, we prayed before every single meal, right? You could do it with the wrong heart, but at the same time, that is formative. It won't leave their memory that easily, right? Like you celebrated Christmas maybe in a special way and it doesn't leave their memories. There's anchoring points to something greater that it's ingrained in their life that'll probably far surpass us, right? Like we're
Yeah.
leaving behind, like you said, these things that are anchors, that are soil, that are seeds that will far surpass us and hopefully one day take root and burst into something glorious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great lesson, and this is why I love recording this podcast, not just because I get to hang out with you and talk about spiritual things and positive things, but, like, it's recorded, and my kids will sometimes watch this, and even just me, sometimes I'll look back at old clips and lessons that we've talked about, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that is pretty mind-blowing concept that we talked about," and to see that years later or just have a documented artifact of that is so useful, right? Like, who knows, like, what my kids would think about when they watch this years from now, right? And to understand
Yeah.
it, to understand how vital this is. So traditions can be and are formative, even if you practice them with the full heart or not.
Mhm.
I think we still need to do them. I think that's such a great point. So it's really shaping us, right? From a spiritual maturity standpoint, I maybe think that's a different angle. Like, does this actually make us more mature because we are practicing them with the full heart? I think that's an idea that I have in my mind. I'm like,
Yeah. But
You know what I mean?
even if we take well, just take the word tradition out of it, right?
Yeah.
If the Bible tells us don't sin, and we're like, you know what? I don't have the heart behind this command right now. Let me just go enjoy my sin, right? It's almost like we're then teaching ourselves to be led by our feelings on what we do or what we don't do, right? And that in and of itself is a sign of immaturity. It's a sign
Oh,
of we just want to do whatever our feelings dictate. But I do think in some senses the discipline that we may have to do in how we treat our sin or something, some action that we need to take, even if we don't necessarily want to, or we don't have the desire, or we don't even know why we're doing it, but we know that we have to do it for a certain reason, is almost like a way that we can view tradition, right? Like it is something that we teach ourselves to be disciplined in doing because we know that it will pay dividends, that there is fruit behind it, just like we treat sin sometimes, right? Like in some senses. So I don't know if you have a thought or if that was more of a heretical statement from your standpoint, but that's kind of how I see it.
yeah, maybe a heretical statement, but I think if you can, like to me, where the spiritual maturity comes from is the understanding the why behind the tradition. And yes,
Mm,
we have to. I think there's a discipline aspect to it. I mean, just let's take a practical example, like Lent. If I am just going through the motions and just giving something up for Lent, but then as I grow spiritually mature in my faith and have the understanding of what the gospel is doing to my heart, it changes the way
yeah.
I observe Lent later on,
Yep.
right? And like I might be doing the same exact action and participating in the tradition, but now I'm doing it with a full heart. And I feel like that it is a result of my spiritual maturity. And
Yeah.
so I don't know if it's a cause of the tradition. It's not, it's really the gospel, right? But like I think there's something to be had that it actually helps us be more reflective, right? And
Yeah.
be more of a practical Christian.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of Lent too, right? Like when you do it with the full heart and not like a weight loss program, there is a different level of formation that happens inside of you. And speaking of Lent too, I think it's a good segue into just what does that mean that we're doing something that has very big ties toward church history, right? I mean, Lent is something that we took a cursory look on where, you know, the early church, more than Advent or more than the birth of Jesus, they really focused on the resurrection of Jesus. So even within the first century churches, there's a lot of evidence to say, hey, before Easter came around in the calendar year, there was days of fasting, maybe not a full formed 40 days, but 2, 3 days of fasting where they're preparing their hearts to observe this calendar resurrection of the time of when Jesus, you know, rose from the dead. And they would prepare their hearts. There would be baptisms, even in the early church services, and all these different sort of traditional and or like things that they repeated every single year. And of course, over time, that got formed into more of like a national 40 days of fasting where we do X, Y, and Z with dietary restrictions and all this other stuff. But we see that there's a tether through church history that says, even from the early church to now, regardless of the heart behind it, everyone sort of observed this. This is part of being a Christian, was doing this thing. We kind of come toward present day post Reformation where it's like, Lent is optional. It's fine. We don't have to do it, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And you know, we agree with that statement in some senses that this is not going to save you one way or another if you do it or you don't do it. But what does it say about our own maybe Christian walk or life if we decide we don't want to do something that the entire cloud of witnesses in heaven in some senses probably did, and they're looking at us and they're looking at our life? It's like, hey, why don't you do this thing? Right? What's your take on that, Joby? Like, do you feel the same way? Do you feel like there's something missing if we don't do it?
I do. I do think there's something missing if we don't do it, especially if all of church history did a certain practice, right? But I think you called it out. Like it's not salvific, right? It's not like this is an action that we need to take because it's going to save me. I know there's arguments about baptism and types of baptism and all this kind of stuff. And like you get into lots of different sacraments and practices within Christian theology. But I think there are some practices that, and it kind of goes back to like, what is the output of the gospel transformation in your heart, right? Like when we talk about the fruit of the spirit, right? All of those things that come out, gentleness, kindness, self control, all these like different fruits that come out, it should be naturally in those traditions or disciplines, right? Like I'm not just doing something as a ritual, that is just something based in history, but it actually has a practical output on my Christian walk. And I
Hmm.
think when we talk about Lent or we talk about Advent and just even being reflective of some of these seasons, I think there is a very direct correlation to some of the fruit of the spirit, right? Like when we're talking about self-control and talking about meekness and peace and kindness, all this kind of stuff. There's like you can see the output because it's a transformation of the heart that makes me want to do these things, not just to do it just as a practical ritual, right?
Yeah,
But yes,
100%.
yes, I think church history got a lot of it right, and there's probably theological reasons why you can, have arguments, but I think we
Yeah.
have to like lean on that, right?
Yeah. And I think both of, I mean, I won't speak for you, but at least for me, I do feel like I get concerned in how sort of brazen we are with our brands of Christianity today, where we talk about movements such as deconstruction, and we talk about even churches that we grew up in where we kind of throw out all sort of tradition just because it is tradition for tradition's sake. But because of this, when I think about the question, what do all Christians do, what do all Christians sort of stand for, what is that universal sort of idea of what a Christian is, I can't think of something because it is so diverse, which may or may not be the worst thing, but it's so untethered from a common standing point that from a unity standpoint, I don't know what we all do. From a purity standpoint, I don't know how we all sort of understand and think together, that there is no almost like unifying element. And I do think tradition is meant to be part of that, part of doing things together as a body, like all believers getting together on a Sunday to celebrate what? The resurrection of Jesus. That's why we gather on a Sunday rather than like a Wednesday night. Not saying there's anything wrong with the Wednesday night service, but it is nice to have this idea that all churches throughout history historically did it on a Sunday morning because that is when Jesus rose, why we take communion, why we practice baptism. There are things that are universal that we can tie ourselves together with the larger Christian church throughout every single generation. And the less and less we do that, and the more and more we sort of throw away, the less almost it's hard to understand what does it mean to be like a Christian. Like, what does that life actually kind of like look like?
Yeah.
For sure. And that's
Yeah.
definitely a concern that I have.
It's a valid point. We got to lean into church history. We got to look at our forefathers because those disciplines, I think, it's kind of a really closely rooted word to this. And when we talk about traditions, we need to have the discipline to have it recurring. It's not this one off type of action, right? That we do, but there's a discipline that's attached to it. And I think there's leadership that's attached to this too, because if it's in a congregational setting and a corporate environment where it's a collection of people that do this action together, you got church leaders that help institute these traditions
Mhm.
and kind of give us some guidance on what this actually means so we can have a better understanding of it.
Yep.
But then we think about these traditions that might go wrong. Like when we think about maybe the conservative view of some of these traditions and why some of these denominations might have leaned the opposite way. Like, why do you think they would even have this attitude? Like, we started to unpack ritualism and some of that stuff, but like, why do you think they have some valid points here to say, hey, traditions can go wrong and steer us the wrong direction?
Yeah, I mean, if we start observing something for the wrong reason, it 100% can lead us astray. I know we can get into an example that we saw in the Old Testament, but I was thinking about one in the New Testament that just popped up into my mind. When Jesus heals someone on the Sabbath, all the Pharisees are up in arms and said, "Hey, like, why are you healing someone on the Sabbath? This is against like the law of God." And it's interesting that he, gives this counterpoint of like, well, if one of your oxen, drops in a hole, will you not do that? And how much more does
Mhm.
this, paralyzed man matter to God? But he says something that I think was very striking. I think, if I'm not wrong, it says, man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. And it's a very
Right.
telling statement of how maybe we can start framing traditions as well. We weren't made to necessarily worship and observe these things, but these things were actually made for us to be reflective,
Reflective.
right? And,
Yeah.
and that's a great way to almost frame the Sabbath, these traditions, these church seasons and things. We weren't made to necessarily serve it. It was actually made to serve us in some senses. So I don't know if that does something for your thinking right there, Joby, and
Yeah.
how maybe we can think about one, how we can go astray when we start serving the tradition versus how we can actually benefit when the tradition actually serves us.
Yeah. And I think that's the right dynamic to think about it too, right? Like who's serving who in this scenario? And if we're serving the traditions and doing it just for namesake, and maybe that's the fear from some of the certain denominations that might lean away from traditions is the fear that we're serving a practice and a ritual. And
Mhm.
ultimately that boils down to idolatry, right? Like if I'm serving something other than God, I am serving an idol and I'm going to be beholden to this day of the week and I'm going to wrangle all my kids and throw them into the van and go to church on Sunday or Christmas Eve service because that's what we do, right? Like I think we
Mhm.
talked about this last year, Creasters, the people
Yeah.
that go to church on Christmas and Easter's. Well,
Yep.
that's the only 2 times I go. It's funny because we're like held to that tradition, right? But if we actually said, hey, well, what's the reason I'm going to go to a service and listen to a sermon and worship music and partake in that is because of who Jesus is. If I
Yeah.
understood the intent, it changes the dynamic of who am I serving, right? And I think that
Yeah.
is a very valid concern for people. And we got to like battle against it because then we might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as they say, right? When we
Yeah.
talk about, I'm going to lean away from traditions because I have a fear of idolatry. But then I also lose all the value of the disciplines and the reflection and the sacredness of those moments that the traditions can actually bring us, right?
Yeah, and but I think it's valid, right? Like there's the concept of throwing the baby out with the bathwater for sure, with some of the things that we might have let go of being in a very non-traditional space. But at the same time, we do see examples in scripture of traditions being destroyed or symbols being destroyed because they did become such an idol. One of the passages we pulled out while we were making this episode was from Second Kings chapter 18 with the bronze serpent. So for those that
Yeah.
don't know, in the desert, there was a episode in the wilderness where the people are being bitten by these deadly snakes. And you would think that God would, create some other way to sort of save them, but he decides, hey, we're actually going to make a bronze serpent. You're going to look at the symbol that should bring you death, and from it you are going to bring life, which hint hint is a shadow toward Christ, because the cross that should bring death is going to be the symbol that you're going to look to get life. And that's something that we see on every medical poster here throughout the United States. If you ever wondered, why is there a snake on this ambulance? That's why.
Yes.
It's pointing back to the bronze serpent. Well, guess what happens to the bronze serpent? Time goes by and the people know about this bronze serpent. They set it up and they decide we are going to worship this pole of a bronze snake. And so Hezekiah comes around, I believe it's Hezekiah in Second Kings, and he decides, you know what, we are so astray from where God wants us to be. And he decides, I'm gonna smash this so that no one even has the ability to worship. Now, in some senses, that sucks because this was such a powerful symbol of life. And it was a great thing for the people to remember that, hey, God saved us from death. And look at this thing that we can look at and remember. But when it became something that they started to worship, it became something that was necessary to be destroyed. So I wonder if there are traditional things that we look to and worship that ought to be destroyed because it's more harmful than it is good for us in our walk.
Yeah. I mean, that's so applicable to today, right? Like when we talk about like the seasons and even Christmas, I think it's been talked to death about how commercialized it's been, and we lose the reason for the season and all of that jazz, right? When we talk about misinterpreting what the true intent is, but yeah, it's a very valid take that we can lean on traditions so much that we twist the meaning and are so far removed from its original intent that we idolatrize it. So it's just one of those crazy things where I think we need to have great disciplines, great leadership in reinforcing the intent because we are so limited as human beings. But that's a great example, right? Like we can turn something for good into something really, really bad if we don't truly have the correct guidance. And I think that's why, like, man, I think about this with the people who are like, I can worship Jesus at home. I can just do my own thing. Like, guess what that could spiral into if you're not part of a healthy body, right? It could turn
Mhm.
into you worshiping a serpent on a stick, right? It's
Yeah.
just one of those things. If you don't have the right guidance and are surrounded by the right body, because our interpretations can really twist what scripture is intended for. And I think that's can be a really dangerous place, right?
Yeah, and even coming from a non-traditional Pentecostal side, I think about some of the things that we take as good things, such as, hey, if God gives us the ability to speak in tongues, and that's a gift that He has given to the body. But you see some of these churches that preach this ought to be a universal gift across all people. And if you don't have it, there's almost like you're not praying
Mm.
enough. There's something wrong with you, that maybe you're not spiritual enough to get it because God has promised that He'll give it to anyone who asks. And we start twisting different Bible passages to the point where some people, if you ask them, it's like, hey, do you have the Holy Spirit? They'll be like, no, because I don't speak in tongues. It's like, do you think that's all the Holy Spirit is? Man, it's like how much have we even twisted some of these good things and made them like these idolatrous things, even in places that we don't think that we have any traditions, but they are all around us, right? Like we can't escape them no matter what. But that is just one example that popped into my own head as I was even reflecting on, some of the areas that we grew up in, and even seeing some of these good things that might have become, almost idolatrous and wrong in some senses.
All right, so that's the last you're going to hear of Jeswin. He's been permanently banned from all Indian Christian spaces. Well, great talking to you, Jeswin. But no, it's totally true. It's like one of those things where, man, it's not even traditions. Like we take good things and we amplify a meaning that might not be there and twist it into our own interpretation. And that I think that's why, like we talk about church history and like understanding what church fathers and practices were to understand what we should do even practically today, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's a really interesting space to maybe observe a little bit for the people that are like living in between the tension of like, should I lean more into some traditions, but I don't want to fall into this idolatrous, ritualistic type of point of view. Is like you got to be part of a healthy body and healthy Bible believing church and great leadership to help formulate and guide you into some of those practices, right? So, like, then what do we say to the people, like the Christians who are maybe not practicing some of these traditions? Are they just completely spiritually immature or are they just lost causes? Or what can we say to those folks that might be curious about some of the traditions that they've probably never experienced before?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And oddly enough, the only thing that's coming to my mind is something that Pastor Mohan actually said. And it was actually in regards to the Sabbath, right? Like when we think about us taking a Sabbath rest and learning how to, take a break, be dependent on God, spend a day in His Word and just doing things that recharge us rather than going with the flow. Understanding that we don't have to do this. This is not, an instituted thing that's salvific in any sort of way. And again, like we even talked about even on this episode, how Jewish people back in Jesus' day made this a very ritualistic thing without understanding the heart behind it. And we saw that tension. So when you ask a question like, well, what exactly should we do for the people that aren't practicing or the people that want to practice and miss out? One of the things that Pastor Mo said in regards to instituting a Sabbath in our own life, this is something that you don't have to, but you get to. So why don't you? And it's such a great like thought. You don't have to do this, but you get to do this. So why don't you
Mhm.
do it? Right? Like, why don't you? Why don't you see what would change because you're allowed to do this thing? And see how it forms, you see how it shapes, you see how it changes. One of the ways that I think I instituted this was after going to college, especially not coming from a church that observed Lent, was actually trying Lent, right? Like for a season. Now, I didn't really change dietary restrictions, but I decided, hey, for 40 days, I'm going to wake up, at 6 a.m. in the morning and I'm going to start my day off with like just an hour of just prayer and getting into my word and just see how it shapes me, and a committed 40 days to doing that. And it was amazing. It was amazing. It was definitely a spiritually forming, thing to try and to do. And every couple of years in Lent, I haven't done it in a minute, but definitely trying to do something that just shakes up the routine of a day-to-day life. And I feel like in those seasons when you spend time dedicated to God in that way, that He has honored that. And I feel like in those seasons He has spoken as well. So, something that I don't have to do, but I get to do. So why wouldn't I do it?
Exactly. That's a great point. And I think even at the beginning of the new year, I think a lot of churches practice a 21-day fast. You don't have to participate in it. And there's different versions that fit people's weekly schedules and lifestyles. But it's such a great spiritual discipline that you get to do. And I think if you look at it from that lens of, I get to do this and participate in this practice with a body of believers, you never know what the outcome could be, right? And I think that is such a output of the gospel in you, right? Because it transforms you. I think about generosity and giving. Like we've been given so much, so I get to give, right? I think I hear that example a lot. I think just having that frame of mind maybe makes us look at traditions a little bit differently, right? And maybe even for
Mhm.
the folks that are leaning into traditions a lot and you probably lost all meaning of it because you just kind of grew up doing these things every week or every Christmas, right? Maybe now is the time to take a step back and reevaluate why you are participating in some of these things to understand the intent. And maybe to your earlier example, it's like, wait, I used to do this all the time. Now I truly did a deeper dive into the church history of where did it really come from and hearing all the examples of the sacrifice that people had to take to even get to do some of these things, right? Um, and this is a great topic for us to maybe even reflect on. For those of us who have grown up as Christians, and maybe for those of us who made this more transactional. It's like a reevaluation of why are traditions important and how is it going to actually impact my practical Christian walk, right?
Mhm.
So great episode, Jeswin. This is a really eye-opening conversation, even just for me to like reflect on this season. So it's not all about Santa Claus, and I'm going to tell that to my kids that
But
it's
tell
not
them it's all
about.
about the Christmas Father.
I'm just going to put a mask, that Christmas father mask, on some. Somebody sent me a video of like somebody scaring their kids. They dressed up as the Grinch, burst into
Yeah.
the house and just stole all the presents. Maybe that's the discipline. That's the tradition that we need to implement, right? Like, you know
Mhm.
what? None of this is you can't take anything for granted. Like all this can be snatched away in an instant, right? The rapture can happen, just like the Grinch stealing your
Man,
presents
you're
away
going
from you.
back to your roots with brimstone and fire coming down. So I
That's how I
digress. You
grew up.
know what? We spoke a lot about this. If you want to actually hear our take on brimstone, fire, and the Holy Spirit, we have it in our Sunday Scary series. Go back to listen to that. That was one of our top episodes of the
Yes,
year.
yeah, Jeswin got canceled a long time ago, so take a look in the archives. But Merry Christmas to you, Jeswin. Always a great time of a year. Love to hear your feedback. For those of you listening, like, subscribe. Make sure you follow us on our social media handles. Love to engage and hear your experiences too. So if you got some great stories that we can reflect on, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. And these are definitely candid conversations. So if we did offend anyone, I'll apologize next week.
Yes, exactly. Ask for forgiveness later. So Merry Christmas, sir, and
Merry
we will talk to you
Christmas.
guys soon. See ya.